what they want. They want us to know nothing of what empowers the people and what restricts the government, which is basically what the Constitution does. So they're trying to wipe that out. So that's basically all I have to say about the standards. Now, in terms of in the classroom. Now, the legal issue. Okay, we're going to start off with the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 8, enumerates the powers of the federal government. And in those enumerations, absent are matters of education. There comes the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that if it's not a power granted to the federal government through the 10th Amendment, it flows down to the states. Then we have the state constitution. The Florida Constitution acknowledges that education shall be a matter for the state, and it further gives that power to the legislature. And so in the state legislature, they decided that standards shall be developed on a state level. And that curriculum and textbook adoption and the other details that flow in matters of education shall be left and reserved to the local school board, parents, teachers, citizens, and it makes sense. The reason why the founding fathers didn't want the federal government to be in charge of certain things is because they realized that people were going to want to address those issues. And it's kind of difficult to get in a plane and fly to Washington, D.C. every time you want to address an issue. And so matters like education are very local in nature because when you're a parent and you have children, you're kind of weighed down, right? It's not that easy to just get up and go to the state capitol or the capital of the country, the United States. So you're limited. And so we would go to the school board. Now, that's theory. Let me go ahead and share with you my personal experience. Because I know the law, not that it really has any respect anymore. Okay, well, I'm against the Common Core state standards. Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the school board. I kind of stopped going there because it's kind of futile at this point. But I was ignorant. So I went to the school board, and I'm telling them, hey guys, school board, I don't want this here. I don't want the Common Core. And if you go to my YouTube, if you Google my name and you Google YouTube at the same time, you'll see a video of the school board meeting where the superintendent of Dade County shrugs and says, well, we're just taking orders from Tallahassee and from Washington, D.C. Well, then comes the question, well, then where are we paying your salary? Right? Why do we have a school board if you have no function or say? But I digress. Okay, so what do? I get in a plane and I go to Tallahassee, and it seems that legislators, at least the only one that I met, says, well, I'm sorry, that's a local school board matter. And she's right, actually. She was right. It is, by law, a local school board matter. But we're being ping-ponged, right? Now, interestingly, on the way up, I was sitting, waiting to board the flight, and there was a gentleman sitting next to me. And then this woman walks in, and she sits next to him, and by chance, he's like, hey, what's up with this what is it called? Common Core. They started talking about it. I thought it was interesting, but it proves, as you'll see in the story, that this lady works for the school board. So I guess he was asking, the question with good reason, because this lady works for the school board. I didn't know this at the time. And they start going off as to she's raving about it, like it's this great thing. And I interject, because it's hard for me to keep quiet. And she wasn't very happy with what I was saying, and she basically asked me, although politely, to withdraw myself from the conversation. And I did, I had to, what am I gonna do? Anyways, I continued to listen to all that nonsense. Well, interestingly, on the way down, the lady's on the flight as well. When we got off the plane, I have to stand there in line as she did. She's behind me. to wait for our carry-on because they actually took it away from us, from everyone. But she's standing there with a folder and it said Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the county that I work for. So I saw it and I'm like, listen, I know you don't want to hear what I have to say, but please, please, give me an appointment, I said to her. And I'll tell you, she's like, listen, I know who you are. And I'm like, you do? She's like, yeah, I've seen you at the school board a few times, and I know everything you have to say. So really, why am I going to give you a meeting? I already know what you're going to say, and I'm going to tell you what I'm telling you now, which is that I disagree with you. So you would be wasting your time. She says, but even though I disagree with you, I applaud you for being passionate and for getting on this flight and traveling up to Tallahassee, because that's where you need to address your concerns. I said, really? Well, that one legislator who I met with, she said I had to take my issue to the school board. And with all due respect, as an attorney who's read the Florida statutes, it's the school board that has to address these issues. In fact, there have been, albeit a handful of school boards throughout the country who have unilaterally withdrawn themselves from the Common Core. So that proves what I'm telling you, that this is in fact a local matter and that ultimate control rests with you. No, not interested. So that was the end of that. So what can we take from this? What do I take from this? We've got the theory, which I hate to say it and put it in those words because I mean, I would want the law to be above and beyond and over everyone and anyone, but it seems like the people who we're electing into office, whether at the state level or at the local level, at the school boards, they are taking our laws and just completely disregarding them. So this is a time for us to really wake up, not just on the Common Core, but on everything. What I told you about FERPA, how it was unilaterally gutted by the Federal Department of Education. What I'm telling you now, I mean, this is, and I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, a dictatorship. Okay? This is what is done in countries where they have totalitarian forms of government. There is no rule of law, and that's what we've come to here, except there's an appearance of something that isn't really what's happening. Kind of scary. Now, let me see here. There are also, aside from, and this is another very interesting point, there are 3 federal statutes, and this is all in my PowerPoint. The Elementary and Secondary School Act of 1965, the Department of Education Organization Act of 1979, and the General Education Provisions Act. Those 3 federal statutes clearly state that it is illegal for the federal government to develop curriculum, instructional texts, assessments, any and everything related to education. And the reason why these statutes and even the federal government started to become involved in education was because of the civil rights movement. And really, the main objective at the time was just for them to be able to even out the playing field on a racial level. Well, if you look at a study that was conducted by the Cato Institute, where they analyzed the impact of the federal government in the classroom since they started getting involved, you will see that involvement has gone up, right? And federal funding, which is really local because they're taking the money from us and funneling it up there, and then they threaten us that if we don't do what they want us to do, then they're not going to give us the money. That really originates at a local level anyway, which is why we need to eradicate the Federal Department of Education. And the IRS and the Federal Reserve, and well, it's a long list. So in any event, so you've got on the graph, and they have graphs that really make this very graphic, no pun intended. But yeah, so you've got federal involvement, and then you've got scores, and whether or not the scores have been going up proficiency in student mastery has pretty much stayed the same across, racial lines, and even, if you're just going to analyze white students, they haven't really improved. In fact, there has been a decline. So we really need to ask ourselves, why is the federal government, why are they involved in matters of education? They really aren't bringing anything to the table. They are just taking away, okay? Now, if you read these federal statutes, not the law itself, but if you read the legislative history, the commentaries that the senators wrote in dissent, or, some of them write for and some of them write against, I didn't bring the language with me, but there's some really interesting quotes in there of some senators who envisioned what is happening today. And when these federal statutes were introduced into Congress back in the 60s and in the 70s, they added their dissenting voice in the commentaries to say basically that they could see how this could be misused and how this power that was being given to the federal government could be overstepped, as it is in fact. So when I read that, I was like, wow, how insightful these senators, were. I mean, it's really mind-boggling how somebody can just pretty much look into the future without really having had any reason to suspect anything. But I guess, some of these people are, in fact, intellectuals, and so they were able to see past what they were doing. Now, having said that, and this is really scary, there is a bill that's being introduced in Congress right now, and it's already been introduced. It's Senate Bill 1094. And this bill is undoing, they want to pass a law that undoes the Elementary and Secondary School Act, which is a law that says, hey, federal government, hands off on education. You can't this, you can't that, you can't the other. They have now introduced a bill, a senator has introduced a bill to state exactly the opposite. Again, inconsistent with our Constitution. And further, and even scarier, there's a part in that law that says that if a state wants to make an educational change within that state, that they need to submit a proposal to the Secretary of the Federal Department of Education, in this case Arne Duncan, for approval. So, conclusion, a group of senators, as we speak, in our Congress, want to pass a federal law that would null and void the laws that restrict federal control over education. They want to make it legal for them to be able to overstep their constitutional bounds.
You know who these senators are?
I could email it to you. I don't have the name off the top of my head.
I'll get that out.
But I could definitely, but if you Google SB 1094, Senate Bill 1094, you'll find it. Okay? It's a really fat bill, but I've kind of given you the gist of what the problem is. And there's an author, Anita Hogue, okay, she wrote an article that consists of 2 parts, and she discusses it in there as well. So let me start wrapping this up. Now, this is something important for the audience to understand. The federal government developed the standards. They are also developing the assessments. And they will tell you, the people, oh no, but we're not developing curriculum. Well, Arne Duncan, and I quote, he said, curriculum can only be as good as the academic standards to which the assessments and curriculum are pegged. What does that mean? That means that if you are developing an assessment to test a standard, you are indirectly controlling the curriculum which flows and is coming from those standards. So when they tell you, we are not developing curriculum, you tell them that is a lie. That is a lie. Okay? And last but not least, there is currently also, in addition to the lawsuits for the violations of FERPA, there is a think tank organization called Southern Poverty Law Center, which has also filed a lawsuit, a civil rights violation lawsuit, because these new standards have different expectations for different students depending on their ethnicity or race or whatever you want to call it. Asians being expected to perform at the highest level, then whites, then Hispanics, and then blacks. Why is this important? Let's say that I teach at a black school, and my black children